Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air Global Network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is B.A. Paris. Bernadette is the New York Times and Sunday Times bestselling author of 7 novels, including the word-of-mouth hit Behind Closed Doors and her upcoming thriller, The Guest. Over 7 million editions of her work have been sold worldwide, and her books have been translated into 41 languages. 3 of her novels have been optioned for major screen adaptations with a film of the breakdown titled Blackwater Lane in post-production. Before becoming an author, Bernadette, who spent most of her adult life living in France, worked in finance as a trader before retraining as an English teacher. She and her husband then ran a language school together whilst bringing up their 5 daughters. Today, she writes from her cottage in Hampshire, England. Welcome, Bernadette.
Thank you for having me on, Danielle. Thank you for the introduction. It doesn't sound like me at all.
It is quite impressive. It sounds to me like you've had an incredible life, and your books are so well regarded, so successful, and the guest is going to be no difference from that. It was such a fun read. So before we get into all of the fun things, can you tell our listeners about The Guest?
Yes, of course. So Iris and Gabriel have just come back from a holiday where Iris had hoped that Gabriel would open up to her about a recent trauma that he's had, but he didn't. So she's feeling slightly frustrated, and she gets back home and she finds that Laure, their French friend, has moved into their house while they were away. And it's not as creepy as it sounds because they have the keys to each other's house and they're very happy to help her out. She's very distraught. She says that she's just found out that her husband, Pierre, has fathered a child with somebody else, and they don't have any children themselves. So this is a huge blow to her. And the trouble is, she kind of starts overstaying her welcome, and she interferes a lot by moving things around in the house and wearing Iris's clothes. And kind of to get away from this oppressive atmosphere, Iris makes friends with a new couple that have come into the village, Hugh and Esme, but they have their own cuckoo in the nest, their gardener Joseph. And really the book centers around the relationship between these 6 people. And of course, because it's a thriller, there are quite murderous circumstances.
Quite murderous circumstances for sure. Well, you are famous for your twists and your unexpected endings, and this is of course no different. So I have to ask though, are you somebody who sort of plots it all out? How do these things happen for you?
I'm not a plotter. I always know how my story is going to start. I think about my opening scene and I know the end. So I know the characters, not very well, but I know who the character is going to be. And I know how I want my book to end. So really, it's just working towards that. And I don't really know. Of course, I've been thinking about it in my head. So I'll kind of have ideas about where the story might be going. But I'm always surprised at where the story actually does go, because it's never really where I think it is. Because as you get to know your characters, they begin to act on their own, or you think, well, actually this character's turned out a little bit differently to how I imagined, so I can make them do this. And I just find it a fascinating process. I have tried to plot because I think that's probably an easier way to go, because when you don't, it means that you have quite a lot of editing to do, but I just can't do it. I just have to go with the flow and see where the story takes me.
And that's been true for you for all your books, I assume. It's sort of the way it's worked for you.
Yes, absolutely. That's just the way I do it. I start my first chapter and then, I'm always fascinated to see what's happening in chapter 10 that I never thought about, So.
Exactly. Well, and in all your books, you have the relationships are at the center. And of course, the idea is that all of us, which is true in real life, have something that we're holding back, right? Some piece of us that we don't share. And in the case of, Gabriel, he's witnessed this young boy die at the bottom of this, ravine. And he's a doctor. So, of course, he feels responsible for not having been able to save him. And I love the way that, that is, he's dealing with, of course, their daughter is grown and gone. It's all these things we actually experience in real life in of course, non-murderous ways, thankfully. And it becomes this this sort of, thing inside him that once he sort of doesn't open up about it immediately, of course it takes seed and it's harder and
Mm.
harder to sort of admit to, what happened and how he feels about it. So it feels quite real. I mean, that's a lovely thing. And maybe that comes from following your character sort of organically. What would Gabriel do? What would each of them sort of do? And anyway, so fun. So I want to talk about your background because we read so much about, attorneys who become writers and, an occasional doctor, but less often traders and people in finance. Now, I spent almost a decade in finance too, which is sort of an interesting, background. But so can you tell us what led you from, trading to sort of retraining in English? It's quite a leap.
It is quite a leap, but I think, at the time I left finance when I was pregnant with my first daughter, or was it my second one? I did go back briefly after my second daughter, I think. It's hard to remember. But, I wanted something that fitted around my children. So actually I gave up work. And for about how many years? Maybe 10 years, I was a stay-at-home mum.
Mhm.
And I only went back to work when my youngest daughter was 3, because they go to school at 3 in France. And when I wanted to go back to work, I didn't want to go back into finance. So I just thought, well, I'm going to retrain as something else. And I was already giving English lessons to friends' children who were saying, oh, could you help my daughter with her English and everything?
Mhm.
So I decided the easiest thing to do would be to train as an English teacher, because I could always find work, and that would fit around my children, because I could take them to school in the morning, go and teach, and then come home and pick them up and everything. So everything was always centered around my children. I wanted to be there to take them to school and to pick them up in the evenings. And often they came home for lunch as well, because they do that in France. So, it's quite a full-on day. And so,
Yeah.
yes, so I became a teacher because it just fitted in with the lifestyle that I wanted at that time.
And I love that. You have 5 daughters.
Yeah, I think if I'd had 10, they would have all been daughters. Maybe I just
I
can't
mean,
carry boys.
that is so funny. Well, there is some statistic. I know my dad was an OBGYN. He would say that by the time you've had 3 of the same gender, the chances that the fourth will be a different gender is like 6%. So there is something about, I don't know what it is, but 5
Yeah.
daughters, that's amazing. So this is another thing I want, since we're killer women, I like to explore sort of the female aspects of this. And you have very strong female characters in all the books. I mean, starting from, Behind Closed Doors, which of course that woman, we won't talk about her, but that's a book. If you have not read, if you haven't started with BA Paris from the very beginning, you need to go back. But that is, women who have been in difficult circumstances, with often in that situation, of course, a very, very difficult man. And yet she rises to sort of overcome, shall we say. And, so I wonder about that with your daughters. Do you find yourself sort of, what is it you want your daughters to pull from your books? Obviously not murder, of course. None of us want our children to pull that. But, do you find yourself thinking about, sort of your daughters in this sense of these strong women? And was that,
I think
I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think my daughters do influence the way I write my female characters, because I have brought them up to be strong women, to stand up for themselves, and some do it more than others. But I like them to be aware that they can do what they want. As long as they go the right way about it, and they are quite strong characters. And I think that, and I really do want my women characters to win through in the end. I just think that's a really important message to give to my daughters, that even in the most difficult circumstances, you can win through. You just have to be determined. And it comes to, whether it's a job, or whether it's your life, or whether it's your marriage, or whatever. So, that's what I hope they take away from my books. They don't always read all of them, because sometimes they're very busy young girls, but some of them do. So that's fine.
That's lovely. Well, I love that idea. I mean, 5 daughters, that is a lot of daughters. So you said you and your husband started a language school in France. So you mean you taught, tell us about that. That's really interesting too.
Yes, I was teaching. So I started teaching in a local school and at the local university, and I was getting more and more work. And my husband, at that point, it must have been 2007, he decided to leave the world of finance as well, because it had changed so much, and he was working such long hours. He had always traveled a lot, so he was rarely at home. And actually, the 3 older children say they don't really remember him being at home when they were growing up, when they were
Yeah.
young. And so when he decided to leave finance, I thought, well, great idea. You'll be at home for a while and it'll be easier. You know, it'll take some pressure off me. And that's actually when I started writing, because I suddenly found that with him there, I had a little bit more time on my hands. He would take the children to school. And he had taken a few months off to think about what he wanted to do next. And meanwhile, I was getting more and more requests for teaching and a lot of business English as well. And so we decided, why don't we, you know, teach business English as well? So we set up our language school, and then we'd go into Paris 2 days a week to teach English. And, you know, so, and well, he used to go in most days and I would go in 2 days a week. And so, yeah, so we just, and it was so much nicer working for ourselves and
Yes.
working together in a way. So
I bet that was lovely. Well, that's incredible. Well, so now you mentioned in your, I also from your bio, sounds like there's an upcoming thriller from one of your books that's actually in post-production. That's getting
yes,
pretty close. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
yes, that was really exciting. So yes, it's my second book actually, not the first one, which was optioned for film straight away, but it's the second book. So I was quite surprised when that was optioned, but I was lucky enough to go and see it in production in England, and that was just the most amazing experience, because although I know that a lot of my book, or some of my book, won't be in the film, and there'll be things in the film that aren't in my book, the 2 times I went on set, it was actually, and that was just by chance, it was really 2 scenes from my book. And to actually hear the actors and actresses speaking the words that I wrote, because they don't change them, it was absolutely incredible. And just to see the characters come to life, it was really amazing, and it's really exciting. And yeah, I'm just waiting to hear more news about when it might come out, and if it's going to be on screen, on the big screen, or whether it's going to be, you know, on maybe on a streaming channel. I don't know. So I'm waiting to hear more about it. These things always take a long time, but it's
Yes.
really exciting.
Well, that is so exciting, and that was a wonderful book. But you're right. I mean, I think, you know, when I read your first book, I thought, oh, I this will be on screen. So I imagine there's people still working on that as well. But what an exciting
Yes.
process! And there are times when, you know, authors feel like the book gets changed so much that it's really hard. So it's lovely that their vision sort of, you know, really aligns with your vision of the book.
And I think, you know, I haven't seen the whole film, of course, so I'm sure I'll be saying, oh, that's not in my book. And but you know, I just think to have your book made into a film is just something quite remarkable, something that I didn't even dream of. It never occurred to me that this could happen. So, you know, and the actors and actresses are wonderful, and I'm sure they'll do a really good job. And I just can't wait to see it.
Of course, so exciting. And I think that's right. You just suddenly, because I think when you write, I don't know about you, but when you write, it is a visual process in your head, right? But then to see it done by somebody, you know, in actual visually is really, really exciting. So
Mm.
that is so fabulous. So tell us, you know, so do you structure, now that you're sort of, your children are grown, I assume, how does the process, how is it different for you? There's obviously more time, but you're quite busy now. You've got a book coming out, and I'm sure working on another book. So do you have how do you structure your days?
Oh, you know, I think, do I have more time? I'm not sure I have more time now that they've left home, because we moved back to England we were here to be near my parents, who are quite elderly. And that was 5 years ago. My father, who's going to be 100, is still alive. So you know, I do visit him quite regularly. And although my daughters have all left home, actually, no, we've just had two. They have never really they do leave, but then they might come back because they're in between flats or in between partners or something. So
Mm.
it's really rare that we have nobody living with us. And in fact, one of my daughters moved out last weekend, and my other daughter and son-in-law are moving out this weekend. And I'm just thinking, well, actually, it'll be a little bit calmer after that. And, you know, even when your children have left home, and maybe
Mm.
especially daughters, they're still on the phone to you a lot. I mean, my husband and I can sit down in the evening, maybe to watch something on television, and the phone will go, and it'll be one of our daughters, and we'll chat and hang up, and then there'll be another daughter who phones us. So, I mean, it's not like that every evening, but I'm not sure that I have more time really. So
Right.
my days are higgledy-piggledy at the moment, but I'm hoping for calmer times, because what I love is when I can get up and just write for the whole day if I want to. And those are my favorite days. But I think I need to structure my days differently, and that's what I'm trying to do, so that I would write in the mornings till about 2 or 3 o'clock, maybe with a little break for lunch, and then after do something for me, because I'm very aware as well that time is pressing on. And there's still lots I want to do. And for example, a friend might invite me for coffee and I'll say, no, I've got to write. And I think actually that's probably the wrong way to go about it. And I should be prioritizing a little bit more time for family and friends. So this is how I'd like my life to be, whether it will, and I did decide that from January it would be like that. So January hasn't been great, but I'm hoping that from this, we're the 1st of Feb today, and I'm just hoping that this is how my life will be, that I'll get up, write for about, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours, and then do something, go for a walk, see friends in the afternoon. And to me, that would be a perfect way of structuring these.
Right. There is a sense with when you're, and it's probably true also when you were self-employed with your language school, that when you're self-employed, and my 24-year-old daughter is here with me, living at home for a little bit. As you said, they do come back. And it is funny because she says, gosh, you work all the time. And it's
Mm,
true. There's sort of this compulsion if you're not writing, because of course we'd like to think that that's what we do, we write, but there's so much more, of course, to it, right?
mm,
I mean, there's always the editing another book or these
that's
kinds of
right.
conversations or a million other things that you have to do. So it's hard because of course you love the writing, but it isn't a perfect balance, is it? And
No.
our partners sometimes say, are you down, are you in that office again?
Yes.
Do you want to come out for a while? So I completely understand that.
Mm. My
Well,
husband says we can go on a 10-hour car journey and I won't speak to him for 10 hours because I'm just in my head, writing in my head my next chapters or whatever. And, now and again, I'm really conscious that I haven't said anything to him for ages. And I'll say, oh, and I'll start speaking to him but he's very good. He just knows that I'm right. He always says, oh, you're writing in your head. So I think, we're lucky to have partners that just put up with the way we are.
yes, exactly. Yeah, well, exactly. I think that is the trick for writers. You have to have a really supportive
Mm.
partner because it's a weird job, and it is a lot of time on your own and in your head for sure. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on now? I'm sure as every working writer, the moment you've got a book out, you're also neck deep in the next
Mm.
thing. Can you talk about it or too soon?
Yes, I have my deadline coming up quite soon, so it is a busy time trying to get that book finished. Um, it basically is about a young woman. I can't say too much about it, of course, because I
Of
haven't finished
course.
it, so I'm not really sure where the story's going. Well, I know
Right.
the end, but I don't know the rest of it. But it's about a young woman who thinks she has a stalker, but again, she has a past, and is this stalker somebody from her past or is it somebody from her present? And so yes, it's another book where there's a lot of things we don't know and people are keeping secrets from each other, which I think is always the foundation for a good thriller.
I agree. And one of the things I also love about, your books and your characters is that there's nobody who's kind of perfect because I think, we sort of understand that and then none of us is perfect, of course, anyway, but the idea that, we all make little decisions that are maybe questionable, that in the moment seem like a smart decision, but then they sort of, they snowball, and it's true even in characters who are generally very good people. Without giving anything away, what happens to Gabriel is a very good example of that. And it really just it these things, of course, like in real life, they start to sort of gain momentum, and then all of a
Mm,
sudden the sort of situation gets bigger and a little out of control. And
mm,
I love that because I feel like we can relate to those characters who make a bad choice, but not
mm,
even that bad, right? You're doing it with
mm.
the right intention, and then all of a sudden, it's a much, much bigger problem than the
That's
one you
it.
started with. So I love that. I love that about your book. So that's fabulous. Well, the next book sounds amazing. This book is available now. And again, if you haven't read, I can't imagine. Is there anybody out there who hasn't read a B.A. Paris book? I can't even imagine. But if you haven't, um, 7 amazing books, and The Guest is no different. Bernadette, I hope this is a huge, huge success for you, like your other books, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today on Killer Women with B.A. Paris and her latest thriller, another page turner, The Guest. We will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.